America's image is largely determined by its skyscrapers. Chicago's silhouette is one of the nicest in the world, which is understandable if we know that such artists worked here as Sullivan, Burnham, van der Rohe, and Frank Lloyd Wright. They taught America and the world how to build skyscrapers, and these tower buildings were at home earlier in Chicago than in the more famous New York. In 1871, the single-story city, mainly constructed of wood, was demolished in a fire. A local legend says that O'Leary's cow kicked over a paraffin lamp in the cowshed, and this caused the fire. It's said that 17,000 buildings were destroyed, and only 2 remained unscathed: the water tower and O'Leary's shed. Whether this is true or not, it's sure that the people who lost their houses wanted to quickly construct buildings which made maximum use of the more and more expensive sites. As the saying goes, the price is sky high. Planners saw the solution in reinforced concrete structured buildings, which also gave better protection against fire than wood-structured houses. However, if we think of the film The Towering Inferno, the Chicago School of Architecture surprises pedestrians not only with its skyscrapers, but also that the 24-kilometer-long shore is lined with verdant parks and beaches. Try telling anybody that Chicago is an industrial city, though it is. It's the citadel of steel metallurgy and the rubber industry. Moreover, here's the busiest airport of the world and the main distribution center of the American railway system. In the city of 3 million people, they're the centers of 2 really typically American large industrial companies: Wrigley's Chewing Gum Factory and McDonald's. The explanation for the latter is that corn and wheat production and cattle breeding are quite significant in the land extending from the Great Lakes to the Great Plains. The most elegant route of the city is Michigan Avenue. The part between Oak Street and the river is called the Magnificent Mile. Here are the top boutiques, galleries, and restaurants. The most characteristic building of Michigan Avenue is the John Hancock Center. The 100-story black steel building can thank its unrivaled overall impression to its diagonally supported framework structure. The 343-story building looks as if it had wings. There are garages and offices about halfway up the building, then on the 45th floor, a multi-level entrance hall with a covered swimming pool. Chicago still has to fight the memory of Al Capone and his gang. In the America of those days of Prohibition, this city was the hotbed of crime, and though those years are already over, many still judge it by its past. Today, Chicago is a real multicultural metropolis with an ethnic image defined by Irish, Polish, Jewish, and Italian immigrants besides the Anglo-Saxons. In addition to industry, agriculture and trade, science, culture, and tourism are also significant. Several large universities, opera houses, dozens of world-famous symphony orchestras, theaters, cinemas, and museums make it the cultural center of the Midwest. Though the city is enormous, the most important sites are centralized in the Loop. This is the area encircled by the downtown elevated railway called the L, and here are the skyscrapers which so determine the appearance of the city. The double high-rise called Marina Towers is probably the most photographed site of Chicago. At the time when the Sears Tower opened in 1973, it was the highest building in the world. Its top floor is 443 meters high. Of the 103 lifts, there are some which deliver passengers with express speed in 1 minute to the top floor. Supposedly, you don't need to have astronaut training beforehand. From here, not only the top of the smaller skyscrapers can be seen, but also the shores of Lake Michigan with its beaches and verdant parks. In 1933, the World Fair was held on the southern part of the downtown shore. From this, only 2 exhibition halls have remained, but the huge stadium copying the Roman Circus Maximus was built here, and it's always full when the Chicago Bears play football. The Field Museum of Natural History, a huge building block in classical revival style, is located between Burnham and Grant Parks and is one of the most significant institutes of its kind in the world. Its materials can be divided into 4 groups: anthropological, botanical, geological, and zoological exhibitions. The John G. Shedd Aquarium is also built in neoclassic style. It was built on the front of the peninsula, extending into the lake. More than 7,000 aquatic animals live in its more than 200 containers. Most of the skyscrapers also function as lookout towers, but there are other ways of sightseeing as well. We can also admire the city by helicopter, double-decker, or ship. One of the attractions of the old town is that it transformed itself from a slum to a bohemian artist quarter and is reminiscent of Greenwich Village or the Latin Quarter in Paris. Chicago is also called the Windy City, which refers not only to the fact that there's always a soft breeze from the lake, but is also meant figuratively, since there are always fresh winds blowing, especially concerning the architecture and city planning. The famous Route 66 used to be one of the major federal highways. It connected Chicago in the Midwest to Los Angeles on the West Coast, crossing almost the entire United States. The 2,448-mile long way crosses the states of Illinois, Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California, traversing several cities and tourist targets of varying sizes. From Karl May's novel Winnetou, we know not only how to kill a grizzly bear with our bare hands, but also that the West begins in St. Louis. Today, the city, a mecca for blues fans, still tries to tempt tourists with the Gate to the Wild West image. The Memorial Park built around the Gateway Arch also seeks to communicate this image. The Westward Expansion Museum is in memory of the pioneers who conquered the unknown West. In 1859, from the territory of the original 13 states, hundreds of thousands of settlers and immigrants started to move west, where they hoped to find a new and more prosperous life. The settlers had to work hard to procure even the basics needed for living. The exhibition, placed under the huge modern arch, also commemorates the workers who constructed it, and we can get a close view of Lindbergh's Spirit of St. Louis airplane that was the first to fly over the Atlantic Ocean. In the Pioneers Museum, covered wagons and countless artifacts illustrate the heroic age of those who helped to shape the history of the Wild West. The essence of the visitor and child-friendly exhibition is its interactivity. Here, practically anything can be, even should be, touched. We can personally meet the grizzly bear that was tamed to become an exhibition object, and also the American bison. In Zane Grey's words, the carts turned down from the road to a lowland where weather-beaten oaks were standing scattered, and a gurgling small brook wound between its green banks. The horses rolled about in more and more absurd positions in the grass to rub off the perspiration and dust from their backs. The naughty ones were tied up. Ben tried to buy California Red off with a bag of oats. The coachman of the crop cart was also the cook. He appeared, sinking under a huge bundle of brushwood. The picturesque beauty of this moment deeply remained in Hetty's memory. The smoke of the fire, the smell of the smoldering logs, the steaming pots, the new white sailcloth spreading out under the oak tree, the hot flapjack, the appetizing smell of the sizzling bacon. The tall, slim, sunburned young riders in leather chaps and spurs. After supper, they sat around for an hour around the campfire. As night was falling and the breeze started to wane, it was nice to feel the warmth of the smoldering logs. Hetty's small tent, under the high canvas of the coach, was so homey and comfortable that she couldn't even have wished better for herself. It had sensibly turned cold, and cool whiffs were fondling her face through the curtains. After a while, the people's whispering stopped, and the fire's light also lost its vigor. Dark night and quiet fell on everything. Eero Saarinen, American architect of Finnish origin, can be proud of such works as the Technical Center of General Motors, the Milwaukee War Memorial Center, the Cambridge Auditorium, the TWA Flight Center at JFK International Airport, or the main terminal of Dulles Airport in Washington. After his death in 1961, the American Architects Association awarded him the posthumous Gold Medal. He was also well known as a furniture planner. Huge amounts are paid for his works at auctions. His best-known work is this 192-meter-high, slim, silver-colored gateway arch. It was built between 1962 and 1965 from nearly 900 tons of stainless steel plates. Elevator cars holding 5 people run on an oblique path to bring visitors to the top, where they can enjoy the panorama of the river and the city. President Jefferson bought the lands extending to the west of the Mississippi, the so-called Louisiana Purchase, from the French, thus giving the opportunity for expansion to the American pioneers. For this reason, the former town center, which is a park today, is named after him. On the territory of Jefferson Park once stood a slave market. Now there's the old courthouse, which reminds one of the Capitol in Washington, D.C., although the iron-structured dome of the courthouse is higher than the one in Washington. Here the trial of Dred Scott was held, who, in spite of being an African American, demanded civil rights for himself. Though he lost the case, this matter finally led to the Civil War and the eventual abolition of slavery. Route 66, the U.S. Route 66, in other words, the Main Street of America, the Mother Road, or Will Rogers Highway, has crossed the country since November 1926. It started from Chicago, crossing 8 states to reach the Pacific Ocean at Los Angeles. The length of the whole road was 3,939 kilometers. Route 66 has undergone several changes. One of these meant to change the final point from the Los Angeles Olympic Boulevard to Santa Monica on the coast. Route 66 used to be the main road of those migrating to the west, especially during the Great Depression in the 1930s. The route was downgraded on June 27, 1985, and was removed from the highway system of the United States. Its fate was sealed when President Eisenhower, falling in love with the German motorway system, had a new system established in the United States based purely on military defense considerations. From then on, the road was called Historic Route 66 and was put back on the map also with this name as a living monument. The road of all roads, the American dream, the way of Steinbeck, Keruac, the Easy Riders. The embodiment of a life philosophy, freedom itself, in capital letters. John Steinbeck, in his novel from 1939, The Grapes of Wrath, wrote, "Route 66 is the long concrete road crossing the country, waving slightly up and down on the map, from the Mississippi to Bakersfield, through red fields and gray fields, turning up to the mountains, intersecting the watershed, then down to the bright, fearful desert, through the desert, to the mountains again, until they reach Californian valleys." 66 is the road of an escaping nation that runs away from the dust, the rumbling noise of tractors, and the shriveling of lands. The slow northern expanding of the desert, the whirlwinds arriving roaring from Texas, the rises which don't make the fields more fertile, but even deprive from its remaining productive richness. The people are escaping from all these and meet on Route 66, coming from the secondary roads, from rough fieldways, from rut paths, untrodden paths. 66 is the main route, the road of escape. The Pulitzer Prize, which the novel was awarded, only further increased the legend of the road. The name of the Mississippi originates from the Ojibwe Indian Mississippi word and means big river. Together with the Missouri, it forms the largest river system of America. Their joint length is 6,270 kilometers. Mark Twain made the river famous in his books Tom Sawyer and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Jesse James Museum is located in Merrimack Cave. According to contemporary notes, the most famous bandit of the American West robbed 17 banks and trains and looted more than $200,000. President Truman said the following about him: "He was a modern Robin Hood. He stole from the rich and gave to the poor, and this is generally not a bad policy." The Baptist preacher's son wasn't really a Zorro-like romantic hero as the later books and films described. He was a cruel killer, but there's no doubt about his organizing ability. He planned each of his actions with foresight. This also helped him to hide for 16 years from his pursuers, among others also in this cave, which is now shown as a part of America's history. Numerous actors have played Jesse's figure on the screen, including Tyrone Power, Robert Duvall, and Rob Lowe. The Mother Road, as a good mother, also gave its name to show business. Songs have been composed about it. Get Your Kicks on Route 66, which was Nat King Cole's great hit, but Chuck Berry, the Rolling Stones, and Depeche Mode have also used it. Walt Whitman immortalized it in a poem. I tramp a perpetual journey, come, listen all. My left hand hooking you round the waist, my right hand pointing to landscapes of continents and the public road. On April 22, 1889, the central part of Oklahoma was also opened for white settlers. Tens of thousands gathered at the border with covered wagons. At noon, the great land rush began. During the first years, the pioneers forced the Indians back to smaller and smaller areas, and they then started cattle breeding. Oklahoma's first oil well, put into operation in April 1897, is proudly on display even today. In 1904, the engineers found petroleum and natural gas in huge quantities, and from this time, cows had to share their pastures with nodding oil wells. Stanley Kramer's film titled Oklahoma Crude, starring George C. Scott, is about these good old times. The area also inspired the world-famous musical composers Rodgers and Hammerstein. Their piece Oklahoma was one of the hits of Broadway for a long time. Lynn Riggs, their lyricist, was born in nearby Claremore. His house is a museum today. Nearby, the Davis Gun Museum exhibits one of the largest weapon collections in the world. Even if you're on the right track, you'll get run over if you just sit there, said Will Rogers, the actor, humorist, and philosopher known for his numerous quotes and humor similar to that of Mark Twain, and whose birthplace 20 kilometers to the west of Claremore is a real place of pilgrimage even today. One of the numerous further museums commemorates crude oil mining, and another one, pioneer women. Fort Gibson's lookout towers are typical of military settlements, but there's also a museum of the Native Americans, the Creek, and the Osage Indians. The Cherokee and Seminole Indians, on the other hand, weren't born here. They were brought here by force. The tribes moved from the East Coast roughly took over the good and bad habits and lifestyle of the whites. They dealt with agriculture, and there were even tribes among them which made black slaves work on their plantations. Even during the Civil War, there were Indian chiefs who served as generals alongside the Confederates. The whites abolished the tribal governments, the natives were declared citizens of Oklahoma, and having seized the Indian fields, they organized an independent state which became a member of the United States in 1907. The young state prospered within a short time, mainly due to its natural circumstances. Plateaus, hills, and the Wichita Mountain region form the land of Oklahoma. A majority of its soil is black and fertile, perfect for agricultural purposes. Besides oil, this is the main economic source. The Cherokee Heritage Center is an Indian village where the old days, past life of the tribe is illustrated. An entry from an old encyclopedia says, "The Cherokee is the Appalachian tribe living the farthest north. They seem to be alone among the North American Indian tribes, but it's also possible that the intermediate tribes have all died out. For centuries, the Cherokee Indians have been living in the state of Georgia in North American United States on the southern slopes of the Allegheny Mountains in the most picturesque and healthiest area of the Mississippi River. In 1730, they submitted to the British, to whom they gave the majority of their homeland 25 years later. Later, they also fought heroically for the independence of the United States. Their number at the time of the War of Independence was about 15,000. Sometime later, at the urging of their chief, Joel Lee, a part of them moved to what is today the state of Arkansas. In 1838, the remaining part also left the land of their ancestors. Among the Indians, they're the most respected and best educated. They're diligent farmers with large farms and comfortably furnished houses. They have good horses, the herds of cattle and flocks of sheep are numerous, and they're also good artisans. They trade with the salt obtained by distillation of the salty springs. They have a written constitution, written laws, and well-organized government, which follow in every aspect the jurisdiction and public administration of the United States. The Cherokee language is the last of the Southern Iroquois languages which is still used today. They also have their own writing, but most often they rather use Latin letters when writing in their own language. Cherokee is written in syllables with 85 characters, which is unique of its kind and was created by the chief of a Sequoia tribe at the beginning of the 1800s, after he had recognized the advantages of having written records, influenced by the white settlers. At first, the members of the tribe doubtingly accepted his actions, but his system, built upon almost 12 years of work, quickly became popular. For some of the characters, the letters of the Latin alphabet gave the inspiration, but their phonetic value had no connection at all with the Latin originals. In the Indian village, potters, basket makers, and wood carvers show how their personal belongings had been made for centuries. They even show their old weapons, the tomahawk and blowpipe, and we can also learn some good recipes for our next barbecue party. As on the Path of Tears, the Indians could not always provide a full funeral for their deceased and had to be satisfied with singing Amazing Grace. This hymn was quite popular with both sides fighting in the American Civil War. Since then, Amazing Grace has often been considered the Cherokee national anthem. Due to this, many contemporary Indian musicians have recorded this hymn. There are many artists among the Cherokees. There were also Indians belonging to this tribe among the ancestors of Jimi Hendrix, Johnny Depp, and Chuck Norris. The film patented by the Lumiere brothers in 1895 missed out on the real heroic age of the American West. But it became a means of public entertainment in an era when the Wild West spirit was alive in public consciousness, proven by the popularity of cheap pulp novels, comic strips, and circus shows. Westerns were already among the first silent films, such as the first Great Train Robbery. The stars of the genre soon appeared: Bronco Bill and Tom Mix. Mass-produced stereotype films, which were mainly patterned after horse shows, were followed by epic westerns.
You were walking toward him when he fired his first shot.
Of the fixed stars of the genre, John Wayne had the longest career.
Before there were singing cowboys.
The popularity of the singing cowboy, Gene Autry, decreased sooner. Many other stars who were successful in other genres as well frequently played roles in westerns: Gregory Peck, Jack Nicholson, Marlon Brando, Henry Fonda, and Clayton Moore. Some outstanding film directors were John Ford, Henry Hathaway, and Jack Lee Thompson.
Red birds speak too, Kimasabi. We find rifle shell and tracks of 2 horses.
Examples for characters were provided on one hand by real heroes of the Wild West, Buffalo Bill, Jesse James, Butch Cassidy, Pat Garrett, and Wyatt Earp. On the other hand, created by well-known writers such as Cooper, Bret Harte, and Zane Grey. Though the death of the genre has been mentioned several times, it always comes to life again. In the early 60s, the Italians brought it back. Clint Eastwood has become the most popular hero of the macaroni western, and Sergio Leone, an Italian who found America in Spain, became the most known director. The range of actors is almost endless, starting from the late American President Ronald Reagan to Robert Mitchum, James Stewart, Anthony Quinn, Glenn Ford, and Paul Newman. In the still popular The Magnificent Seven, we can see the bests of the genre: Yul Brynner, Charles Bronson, Steve McQueen, and James Coburn. In the 90s, the Oscar Prize winner Unforgiven also indicated the survival of Western films. The most popular actors of that time, Mel Gibson and Tom Selleck, also tried their hand in this genre. Gibson played in Maverick, Selleck in Quigley Down Under, and Monte Walsh. The 2-time Oscar winner Gary Cooper was born in Montana and was the star of High Noon. The lesser-known Dale Robertson and Tim Holt, who played in The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, are sort of local heroes. Holt was born in Missouri, near St. Louis, like the famous writer Mark Twain, whose birthhouse can be seen near the small town of Hannibal. The writer, educated as a journalist and humorist, became world famous by works like Life on the Mississippi, Tom Sawyer, or The Prince and the Pauper. Many of his stories and novels take place on the Mississippi and surroundings. This is his world. Just like the rodeo, a beloved pastime for some Americans, whether bucking bronco or bull riding. Rodeo star Ben Johnson was born in 1920 in St. Louis. He played secondary roles in the western She Wore a Yellow Ribbon and Peter Bogdanovich's famous film The Last Picture Show. After his death in 1996, a memorial plaque was hung here in the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum. The museum is not only about legendary figures and who personify them, but also shows Western clothes, cowboy boots, dresses, Stetson hats, etc. Blue jeans are the ancestors of today's jeans, which have already become a fashion article and are worn by both men and women. Blue jeans were made first of rigid indigo blue denim fabric for the gold diggers and miners. The label of Levi's jeans still proudly advertises that the trousers can hardly be torn. Western clothing also consisted of a shirt made of similar material, a tan leather jacket, and boots with spurs. The boots could also have been made of rawhide, but the more expensive, more decorative pieces were made of rattlesnake skin, just like some of the big belts with decorative clasps. The wide-brimmed Stetson hat protects against the sun and was a decisive part of the typical clothing. The American Wild West was inhabited not only by cowboys and Indians. The Soldier Blue was a figure which was just as well known in that era. They were put into action against the Indians, and they also fought in the North-South Civil War. Their life was shown in the film Soldier Blue, starring Peter Fonda. The saddest sight of Oklahoma City is the huge metal gate in remembrance of the victims of the terrorist attack of April 19, 1995, and the 168 symbolic empty abstract metal chairs. That's how many died in the explosion, and 19 of those were children. The flowers on Hans and Tori Butzer's memorial that was dedicated in 2000 never fade. The relatives and city inhabitants will never forget that horror. At 9:01 in the morning, due to an explosion, the Murrah building, housing a health center, was almost entirely annihilated. The deranged religious fanatic, Timothy McPhee, had filled a small truck with explosives he'd made at home from artificial fertilizer, detonated it, and walked away. He was caught only years later, identified by the chassis number of his truck. Later, after making a full confession, he was sentenced to death and executed. He made a full confession, but showed no sign of regret. He was the classic example of the deranged mind of a religious fanatic who committed his crime because the death of the members of a dubious religious sect had made him depressed. Oklahoma City's been the state capital since 1910. The industrial city was originally settled on an expansive oil field. More than 2,000 oil wells are in operation in the surrounding area, but the oil city of the prairie is transforming into more and more of a tourist target. In the 80s, the inhabitants decided to reshape the city. Skyscrapers were connected by under and overpasses, and small green parks were added to the area. There's a '66 museum in Oklahoma, too. Here we can discover how America traveled between the 1920s and 1960s. We can see shops, petrol stations, motels, and restaurants preserved in their original condition. With their typical neon lights, furnishings, and ad signs, they recall an era already familiar from films. Let's stop and have a walk in the museum-like village that hasn't been changed for decades, since the interstate highway was built, sentencing it to a kind of slumber. Stop for a while at a neglected part of the road. Let's listen to the noise of the millions of wheels which have passed along here. Vladimir Nabokov put it this way: "By putting the geography of the United States into motion, I did my best for hours on end to give her the impression of going places, of rolling on to some definite destination, to some unusual delight. I've never seen such smooth, amiable roads as those that now radiated before us across the crazy quilt of 48 states. Voraciously we consumed those long highways. In rapt silence, we glided over their glossy black dance floors. By a paradox of pictorial thought, the average lowland North American countryside had at first seemed to me something I accepted with a shock of amused recognition. Because of those painted oilcloths which were imported from America in the old days to be hung above washstands in Central European nurseries, and which fascinated a drowsy child at bedtime with the rustic green views they depicted. Opaque, curly trees, a barn, cattle, a brook, the dull white of vague orchards in bloom, and perhaps a stone fence or hills of greenish gouache. Beyond the tilled plain, beyond the toy roofs, there would be a slow suffusion of loveliness, a low sun in a platinum haze with a warm, peeled peach tinge pervading the upper edge of a two-dimensional, dove-gray cloud fusing with the distant, amorous mist. And the car inside would be a furnace when we got in again, and the road shimmered ahead with a remote car changing its shape mirage-like in the surface glare, and seeming to hang for a moment, old-fashionedly square and high in the hot haze. And as we pushed westward, patches of what the garage man called sagebrush appeared, and then the mysterious outlines of table-like hills, and then red bluffs ink-blotted with junipers, and then a mountain range, then grading into blue and blue into dream, and the desert would meet us with a steady gale, dust, gray thorn bushes. Not only Professor Humbert and Lolita traveled along America's highways, petrol stations, roadside motels, and restaurants. Road movies. How many books and films have been made about the search for freedom and ourselves? Walt Whitman, Jack London, Jack Kerouac, and John Steinbeck. Who writes in his book Travels with Charlie, "It was almost dark by the time I had found the place I was longing to be. The river was wide and friendly. Trees and lovely glades bordered its banks, and near the bank there was a line of pretty white houses standing on the green field of the riverside. A small but well-constructed office, restaurant with calling signs on the door, open and rooms to let. The windows of the office and the restaurant were bathed in the afternoon light. No one was inside. The registration book was lying on the table in front of the bar. There were chairs without backs, the pudding and cookies covered with plastic. The refrigerator was humming, and from the tap, the water was slowly dripping. 'Is anybody here?' I asked loudly, and shook the bell lying on the table." There are less idyllic pictures as well. We can read this from Nabokov. "We passed and repassed through the whole gamut of American roadside restaurants, from the lowly Eat with its deer head, and impaled guest checks, lifesavers, sunglasses, visions of celestial sundaes, one half of a chocolate cake under glass, and several horribly experienced flies zigzagging over the sticky sugar pour on the ignoble counter. And all the way to the expensive place, with the subdued lights, preposterously poor table linen, inept waiters, ex-convicts or college boys, the roan back of a screen actress, the sable eyebrows of her male of the moment, and an orchestra of zoot-suiters with trumpets." And once again, Steinbeck. "I soon realized that if a foreign traveler wants to watch the locals in secret, the most suitable places to do so are in church or in a bar. The restaurants along the roads where men usually have breakfast before work or hunting are also good for this purpose. But if we want to find life in these places, we have to get up quite early. But the innate reticence of Americans living in the country glitters in all its shining glory at breakfast." Creaking wind engines, roads that seem endless, deserted petrol stations, roadside dives. How many American films use them as locations? According to a film historian, the literary equivalent to the road movie is the 17th century picaresque novel. Its hero is the picaro, the adventurer, the traveler. His means of transport was, of course, the horse. The protagonist is usually a disappointed, bitter, sarcastic figure who's involved in strange situations but solves them and doesn't bite the dust. In the course of time and as technique developed, the means of road movies changed. The car appeared. Dennis Hopper's Easy Rider doesn't use the car just because they're rebels, and the motorcycle has a separate cult. The grotesque alternation of realism and irony, a continuous, endless circulation, we never know where we'll end up. The story plays with the viewer as it pleases. It ends arbitrarily. In the name of artistic license, the director cuts the storyline off where he wants. The essence of the road movie is to find ourselves in unexpected circumstances and place, and this induces an unexpected situation. The path is defined, the scene is defined. The means of the road movie during the past 20 years was the car, and will remain so for a while. As the saying goes, on the road I can meet people in any kind of social situation. If I travel by spaceship, I can meet extraterrestrials at the most. Road movies already existed in the heroic age of the film, from Buster Keaton's The General to The Odd Man Out. The genre has changed, from westerns to gangster films to romances and science fiction. Nevertheless, it has remained itself. The story of Bonnie and Clyde has become as classical as Easy Rider and Convoy. The list of films is long, starting from Thelma and Louise to the work of Antonioni or David Lynch. Take, for example, Little Miss Sunshine. The number of Oscars it received demonstrates that the genre has not yet been exhausted and hasn't lost a bit of popularity. Americans have always been eccentric, only interested in pure power, speed, and glory. Already in the heroic age of motoring, their vehicles were nicer and better, and of course, more powerful than those of other nations. The title of a book about the United States, Wedding Bed and Coffin, is very typical of them. It even happened that someone asked to be buried in his favorite car. We all remember Grease and American Graffiti, and several other films that are about the car cult in the United States. We can visit numerous car museums nationwide. In the one in Oklahoma, we can see more than 40 cars, mainly hot rods. So what is a hot rod? Let's hear what an expert has to say. The first hot rods were born in a quite simple way. As today, also in the 1920s, teenagers with their fresh driving license weren't satisfied with the average cars of the era. For the sake of individuality, they wanted to spiff up their old used cars they'd bought for a few dollars of their savings, and in 95% of the cases, this was a Ford Model T. They whipped the car nicely into shape, and as they were able to save more money, they increased the performance as well. The methods of that time are similar to today's tuning, but the fashion and demands of the times were different. It was great if someone had a new cylinder head and carburetor for his old Model T, and most of the times, even its bonnet or hood was removed for the sake of better cooling and a cooler exterior. Those were the basic specifications for the vehicles of that time, and they were then ready for the test. At night, young people raced on the streets. As more and more hot rods frightened the peaceful citizens on the streets of Los Angeles, Burbank, and San Diego, the police was also on the trail of the rascals. This time, the Rodders changed tactics and held their races along the nearby Salt Lakes. After World War II, in 1949, Bonneville Salt Lake in Utah State was the location of the first official hot rod race. By this time, the typical kinds of vehicles had been developed. The roadsters reshaped from the Ford V8 type of the 30s, seated coupes with a shortened roof, without mudguard and bonnet or hood, extremely streamlined and fast, like America itself. In New Mexico, most sites can be found along the road which leads from the northern border of the state from Taos to Carlsbad Cavern National Park by crossing the Capitol and Albuquerque. Taos is famous for the oldest pueblo of the United States, where Indians live even today according to their ancestral traditions. The sites of Albuquerque extend from the 17th century Spanish Old City to the Nuclear Research Center. Roswell is a place of pilgrimage for believers in UFOs. On July 2, 1947, an unidentified flying object crashed in the outer part of the city. Roswell took advantage of the alleged UFO accident and became an attractive target for tourists interested in extraterrestrials. Carlsbad Cavern is one of the longest excavated caves in the world near the valley of the Pecos River. The capital of New Mexico, which is famous for Kit Carson and Apache Chief Geronimo, is Santa Fe with its unique atmosphere. The city is the oldest capital city of the states. The Spanish colonial government moved here in 1610, but archaeologists say the Indians had established a settlement here 300 years earlier. Santa Fe is the city of holy faith, as its name says. The historical city core still reflects the peaceful atmosphere of the Spanish and Indian era. However, in line with the expansion of tourism, the number of hotels and souvenir shops here has also increased. The cathedral named after St. Francis of Assisi is the first church in this state to be elevated by the Pope to the rank of basilica. The city was the center of the conquest of Indian territory and at the same time, that of the natives' conversion to Christianity. On the Santa Fe Trail, tens of thousands of settlers set off to the southwest. Santa Fe Trail was also a famous film of Mihai Kertész, in which Ronald Reagan played General Custer with Errol Flynn and Olivia de Havilland. Many consider the San Miguel Church the oldest church of the United States. It was built in 1621. In a guidebook we read, Santa Fe is an especially lively city. Many times the festivities and parades overlap among the Spanish houses with their red-tiled roofs or the yellowish adobe houses of the antique downtown. The most spectacular is, of course, the holiday of the city, the Santa Fe Fiesta, held in early autumn on the weekend before Labor Day and including parades, colorful carnivals, Indian dance shows, and fairs. The main square of the old town is the plaza. It has preserved its old image and its narrow streets are edged by adobe buildings. Typical of the city are the round adobe walls using natural materials and colors of the surrounding land and the usage of the Pueblo Indians' inheritance. The flat roofs of the yellowish pink cube-shaped houses are held by stump beams, which here are called vigas. In the city, we can still find the charm of incomparable architecture with its link to nature. Under the shaded arcades of the Santa Fe Village, craftsmen's objects are on display. Indian tapestries are spread over the corridor stones to serve as a backdrop for the various wares. Pottery, musical instruments, and mainly decorative objects and jewelry are the focus of this market. Jewelry is partially made of turquoise, which is mined in large quantities in the nearby mountains. The motifs derive from Indian folk art, and some pieces are even made of arrowheads threaded on a leather string. We can buy tambourines, recorders, and even real Indian feather decorations. The woven objects, baskets, and boxes are nice. The local potters decorate their pots and pitchers made on a pedal-driven potter's wheel with their ancient Indian motifs. The objects obtainable here are very similar to the ones seen in the Museum of Indian Art and Culture. Its exhibition features the Southwest Indians' culture and art from the time before Christ. Santa Fe not only has numerous museums and exhibition halls, but there's an extraordinarily large number of art galleries as well. The colors and lights of the land inspire painters and photographers alike. The Rio Grande has its source in Colorado, and during its 2,700-kilometer-long way, it reaches the Mexican border at El Paso. It has several tributaries, and after leaving the mountainous region, it becomes a wilder desert river. It's extremely capricious, often causing floods in the spring, while by the end of the summer, it's almost dried up. The center of the surrounding Indian pueblos is Española. Indians of Cachina, Keruac, Santa Clara, and San Ildefonso lived somewhere in the neighboring cave city. They built parts of their houses in the caves hollowed in cliffs. They made multi-story caves, and there were buildings even on the top of the mesas. They hollowed out separate caves as storage places for food. Their communal house, which has recently been excavated, consisted of 1,000 rooms. They left their caves in the 15th century to move into dwellings which became the Pueblos of today. Karl May writes in his novel Winnetou, "There are ancestral traditions for this unique building method. The Pueblo Indians usually choose a high bank of a river or the cliffs of a dried-up canyon. They cleverly make use of the circumstances, putting up several-story-high, strong stone walls in the slits of the rock faces. Each story is a bit further in than the one below it, and there's a terrace extending in front of it, which is actually the ceiling of the story below. So the ground floor is the most spacious, and the floors above it are progressively smaller and smaller. The whole thing is like a pyramid consisting of cells or a house of cards. There are no stairs in the building. Approaching each floor is possible only from the outside, climbing a ladder. If an enemy is coming, the ladders are pulled in, and only those can climb up who had brought a ladder with them." The power of uplift and erosion are fighting with each other on these endless fields that include the territories of Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah. History also made its mark here. The Anasazi, the most important ancient tribe of the United States, said farewell here to a world that no longer needed them. And some centuries before the Santa Maria had started its journey, they disappeared in the unknown wild of fate. The old, as the tribes came after them called them, were lost in the fog of time. They were followed by the Apaches and the Navajos, later the Spanish conquistadors and missionaries. Then the trappers, farmers, and settlers arrived, and later the silver and gold fever attracted miners and adventurers, armies of gallows birds, and dreamers into these areas. Indian wars, truces, duels, retributions, conventions, massacres, and resettlements interspersed the story of the conquest of the borderland, the frontier. And all this took place in some of the most spectacular scenery on Earth, where from the beginning of time, passes cut by rivers, spans of cliffs, mountain peaks, and valleys have observed people who would like to conquer them with a wise smile. The Grand Canyon can be approached from Flagstaff. There are pedestrian tours, but we can also rent mountain bikes, mules, or horses. Planes and helicopters also depart from Las Vegas. On the way, visitors can see the enormous Hoover Dam as well. Those who would like to spend more nights here can find motels and camping places, while those in a hurry can drive up to one of the lookout points to preserve their short visit by taking some photos. From the Visitors Center, helpful park rangers guide the tourists. Several of them are Indians whose great-grandfather had already lived here and probably was not so kind with the palefaces as his descendant. There are several Indian reservations on the territory of the park, and they're open to the public. One of the nicest lookout points is the West Rim, which is a 13-kilometer-long edge with free bus lines operating along it. Marcella Colombo writes in her book entitled Field of Canyons, "The rock formations outlined on the horizon seem as if they were imitating the churches of both the East and West." One of the pearls of nature sculptures and one of the most telling chapters of the curriculum vitae of our planet is the Colorado River. That is 445 kilometers long, 29 kilometers wide, and 1,600 meters deep. It separates the two edges of the Grand Canyon, located in the northern part of Arizona. The national park starts at Mead Lake, situated between Arizona and Nevada, and extends almost until Powell Lake, that is situated on the border to Utah. Nature formed this unique masterpiece in bygone geological times with its favorite tool, erosion. Descending into the gorge of the Colorado River is like traveling in time in the history of geology. With the help of the succession of layers, we can establish how much time the development of a layer took, just like the way annual rings reveal the age of trees. Over more than 10 million years, the Colorado River has cut out a road for itself and hollowed it, played with it, carrying away the silt deposit of its work. This piece of the crust of the earth, with various cuts and humps, with construction and destruction, reveals to us the most profound history of our planet. Here came into existence such miracles of erosion as Zion National Park, Canyonlands, Capitol Reef, Glen Canyon, Rainbow Arch, Arches National Park, and Monument Valley. This valley, that indisputably has the most beautiful natural formations, has been the scene of several Western films. John Ford discovered it for filmmakers in 1939 when he shot his famous film Red Cloud here. How many cowboys from how many films have ridden since then into the blood-red sunset accompanied by the black silhouette of the cliffs? Hollywood is the city of dreams. Here, anything can come true. Sounds familiar, right? It originates from a popular film of the Dream Factory, Pretty Woman. And what experience is behind those words? There have been shoe shiners and immigrant newspaper peddlers who've become millionaire producers. Dishwashers, waitresses, and shop assistants became film stars. Here, everyone is doing something else, just temporarily, until they're discovered and become stars. Rodeo Drive, the shopping destination of the rich and beautiful, was quite near. Vivian just had to cross Wilshire Boulevard and Dayton Way to find it. She'd never been there before. She was admiring the super elegant shop windows of the stores and the elegant people walking on the sidewalks. Vivian's cheap apparel attracted as much attention here as the local ladies' expensive dresses and jewels would have caused in the Blue Banana. Louis Vuitton, this hung above the entrance of a leather shop. Chanel advertised another sign. Diamonds on Rodeo, she read some steps away. Then Gucci. These names were just ideas for Vivian. She knew them from postcards, and the thought that now she could enter any of these famous shops to buy clothes for herself stupefied her, literally. Nodding her head, Vivian smiled to herself and stopped in front of a shop window. Then she entered confidently. Due to the large distances, poor public transportation, and the wide avenues here, everyone uses a car. Along the roads, nodding palm trees throw their shadows on open convertibles and stretched limousines. The shopping streets of Beverly Hills are some of those rare places in Los Angeles where walking is still a custom. And Hollywood Boulevard is similar. Though today the glitter is faded slightly, walking along this street is an experience which is incomparable for film fans. The famous Sunset Boulevard runs to the south, and above our heads on the Hollywood Hills, gigantic letters advertise the never-fading reputation of the Dream Factory. The stars haven't lived in Hollywood for ages. Instead, they buy luxury villas for themselves in Bel Air, Brentwood, and mainly in the palm tree-lined streets of Beverly Hills, where high fences and thick hedges protect against the paparazzi and curious fans. Otherwise, it's no secret which house belongs to whom, since walking or microbus tours are also arranged here, and tourist offices even sell small booklets with a map for stargazers, including some former residents who have since passed on. Gaining access into the neighborhood of the rich and famous, of course, is impossible, on the one hand due to armed bodyguards, dogs, and the most expensive electronic camera and warning systems, on the other hand because the celebrities have a number of luxury homes and they don't always announce where they'll be staying. The Oscar Awards ceremony was held earlier in the Ambassador Hotel in the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, then for a long time in Shrine Auditorium. The Kodak Theater was completed in 2001, and its main function was to host this famous event. The Chinese cinema called Grauman's, after its former owner and today mostly known as Mann's, is the best-known film theater in the world. The building imitates a Chinese pagoda. Opposite it is one in Egyptian style, while the other cinemas of the area are mainly palaces in Art Nouveau, citing the golden age of cinema, the 20s and 30s. Also, the interior of the Chinese theater originates from this period. On the sidewalk there, we can see the hand and footprints of the stars, the paws of Rin Tin Tin and Lassie, and the footprints of Tom Mix's horse. It also shows how old this custom is, but it's still practiced, and the best-known actors and pop stars feel honored if their reputation is carved in stone. The comedian Bob Hope made this statement about TV in the 50s. Television, that's where movies go when they die. For a long time, the stars of soap operas and TV series didn't have the chance to have their own star or handprint in Hollywood. But today, this has all changed. This isn't actually the heart of the film capital anymore. The studios are farther away, on the way to San Fernando Valley. The most famous is Universal Studio, where we can tour with small microbuses among the sets of old movies and almost have the feeling of an amusement park. In the NBC studio, the audience is let in on the secrets of making a television program. The Santa Monica Pier, the harbor with a Ferris wheel, is one of the best-known points in Los Angeles. Many TV series and films took place here. The heroes of Baywatch saved lives on this coast. Here, the bicycle cops of Pacific Blue cycled. This small town of 100,000 inhabitants is the beach for Los Angeles to the east of the famous Malibu beach. On the coast, turning to the south, we find a string of suburbs, which are holiday resorts. Only the Los Angeles International Airport interrupts the chain of Venice Beach, El Segundo Beach, Hermosa Beach, Redondo Beach, and Palos Verdes. Santa Monica also takes its part of the film industry. The American Film Market is held each year here at Loews Hotel. On the Santa Monica mountain range, Palisades Park towers above the city, from where the coast can be seen all the way from Malibu to Venice. Down below, colorful toy-sized cars speed along on the highways. Dozens of airplanes circling in the air day and night are waiting to land at one of the busiest airports in the United States. A light breeze ruffles the palm trees of Ocean Drive. On the golden sand of the beaches, young people are playing volleyball. Surfers are gliding on the foamy waves. Street musicians, showmen, portrait painters, puppeteers, fire eaters, and breakdancers are swarming on the promenades. On the pier, fishermen are waiting for their good fortune and a catch. This is also where many people try out their brand new vehicles, whether they're driven by engine or manpower. The snack bars offer real American hamburgers, hot dogs, and Mexican tacos and tortillas, which are very popular here. Ice cream is sold in incredible amounts, and they put so many ice cubes into the soft drinks and cocktails that they could ground the Titanic. Under the parasols, swimmers and sunbathers slurp Long Island iced tea. On the terrace of the famous fish restaurant, the Gladstone, special sea creatures are transformed into a brilliant dinner. Filmmakers, stars, wannabe stars, and tourists peacefully relax next to each other under the parasols. The sun setting down above the Pacific Ocean turns the continuously rotating merry-go-round and Ferris wheel into a black silhouette.